There are three theories of motivation, three categories of theories. One is needs theories. What do we need? What is the thing that drives us? Whether it's extrinsic or intrinsic, but what is inside us that tells us this is something I need? Because needs then direct us in the behavior that we want. They give us the power behind our behaviors and the force with which we're going to do something. And the assumption is that when we have a need and those needs are being met, that increases the likelihood we'll behave in the way that we need to behave to get the rewards that we want from the company. The next theory category is the cognition theories, and then the last category is reinforcement, which is on the next slide. But I will explain cognitive here, and then we will address reinforcement theories in the next category. Cognitive theories are the way that we process information. It's like, how does my brain assess a situation and then make a decision to behave in a particular way? What's the thing that triggers the motivating behaviors? It's not just that I need something, but if I get it, is it at the high enough level that it's going to make me want to do this? So the goal of cognitive theories is basically to figure out what is the cognitive process, the thought process that goes on inside my head that is very conscious about assessing what do I do to assess a situation and what do I do ultimately to go, yes, I'm excited, I'm motivated, this is what I want to do. Reinforcement theories are how do we make sure the behavior continues? Because I can get you to do something once, but if I need you to repeat this behavior time and time again in a consistent manner, I need to have a reinforcement system that gets you to recognize that there's a pattern of rewards coming and whatever that pattern is. And it might be no pattern, but you're going to get a reward. You just don't know when, right? But whatever that pattern is, whether it's it's structured or unstructured, that's the thing that will continue to drive you to behave in a particular way. And a great example of this is random drug tests. Random drug tests work as a reinforcement because I don't know when I'm going to get the random drug test. So that pushes me to ensure that I don't engage in the behaviors that they don't want me to engage in. By having a possibility that I might get tested today or tomorrow or next week. And since I don't know when it's going to happen, it changes the way I think about the behaviors that they don't want me to engage in, if that makes sense. We'll get into the reinforcement schedules and theories in a little bit. Needs theories, as I said, are fairly basic, and there are two researchers that are most consistently linked to needs theories. One is Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the other one is Clayton Aldifer, and Aldifer's means of collapsing some of Maslow's categories into three basic categories instead of five, and how that manifests itself is a little bit different between the two. Maslow basically argues that you have to start with making sure your physiological needs are being met, and then once those are met, you can move to safety. Once those are met, you move to social needs. If those are met, you move to self-esteem, and then ultimately to what we call self-actualization. And what Maslow's original theory argued was you can't move up to the more advanced levels of needs and get those met if your lower level needs aren't being met. Like, for example, am I worried about self-actualization if I don't have a home or food on the table? Right now, I would be focused much more on I need food. I don't care about self-actualization. All I care about is making sure I have the basics that I need. And that made a lot of logical sense, if you will, right? But what we also learned is through research and testing, right, that while these categories of things make sense, that it doesn't always go in a linear fashion. It doesn't go from physiological to safety and social and then esteem and then self-actualization, that we can work on these things simultaneously. And that's what Aldifer argued, because, Maslow came up with the idea, the theory, and then it gets tested. That's what the scientific method's all about. And when it was tested, they realized, well, that's not quite right. While the categories are correct, how that happens is very different. And so Aldifer argues that your physiological and safety needs are existence needs. And then our social needs are about how we can relate and connect with other people. And then lastly, self-esteem and self-actualization are about the need for growth. Now, I can easily make the case that I can be concerned about relationships and connections with people, whether it's family or friends or what have you, while I'm also making sure that I've got food on my table and a roof over my head. So I can work on these things together. But Aldifer argues also that growth, there's always an underlying need for growth for people, and it might be subsumed for a while or lessened for a while when I'm dealing with existence or relatedness needs. Ultimately, though, I always have a drive for growth. I always have a drive for connection and relatedness with others, and I always have a drive to make sure that I can exist and be safe and have the food on the table and physical and psychological safety available to me. So all of these things are equally important, and all of these things are equally in us, but I might have to give more attention to one over the other. But there's no hierarchy of you move up and down a ladder like Maslow would argue. Aldifer argued that we can work on all of them simultaneously. Another needs theory that is intuitive but is not necessarily psychometrically sound is Herzberg's theories of what are motivators and hygiene factors. And this kind of gets at intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? Because remember we said that there's a really key important relationship between extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. And this has been something that's held up, over time and psychological and motivation research, right? We need the basic hygiene factors. They have to be there. And if we aren't getting good pay, good working conditions, good connections with others, good job security, good supervisors and managers, these are things that detract from my ability to do my job well. And so I'm not even going to be able to do the bare minimum if I don't have those things. So I have to have those things to get to a neutral point, which is that midpoint. And then the things that actually motivate me and drive me to work harder are the intrinsic motivators, promotional opportunities, opportunities for personal growth, recognition, responsibility, achievement. These are motivators that drive us to go above and beyond. And what Daniel Pink argues in his video, as well as these hygiene factors, is the hygiene factors have to be there. You have to do it well and fair and get that out of the mix of things that you have to be worried about. If you're doing that right and you're doing that well, then we don't have to worry about that anymore. Now what we need to do to get people to be really creative and really good problem solvers is to get them is to play around with the intrinsic motivation. What is going to intrinsically drive somebody to behave in the way that we want them to behave? What do they need to be driven to do that? And so Herzberg's argument was you can't even get to the motivators until you make sure all your hygiene factors are there. Now, the challenge with Herzberg, like Maslow, right, of these early theorists weren't sure how to test their ideas. They came up with wonderful ideas, and then people tested them over time. And while Herzberg was on the right path, he understood that these were two different motivators. Ultimately, the way that Herzberg would argue his theory was supposed to work didn't quite hold up to, empirical testing, right? We call that the scientific method, where people try to repeat them and try to make it a replicable study. And they couldn't find that. But what they did find, though, that there was an important relationship between extrinsic motivators, like those hygiene factors, and intrinsic motivators, like growth and recognition, and that they do work together. And if you emphasize one over the other, if you emphasize hygiene, it minimizes motivators, your intrinsic motivators. And if you're only focusing on intrinsic, but you never ever pay people fairly, you're never going to actualize those intrinsic motivators. It's not going to happen because people need to have those extrinsic motivators out there, done, fair, and ready to roll. So the next category of theories is the cognitive theories, and the first one that we're going to look at is expectancy theory. And I want you to take note of the different colors because the colors matter in the way that we understand and interpret the way this theory works. So all of that stuff in yellow on the left-hand side is baseline what gets us to motivation. But it doesn't always talk about what ultimately gets us to be satisfied. Years ago, we used to say happy workers were productive workers. Like if they were happy, they'd be really productive. And what we realized is it's actually the opposite. That good productive workers, when we create a situation where they can perform to the best of their abilities, they become more satisfied and better and have better performance. So it used to be the opposite. We used to think the opposite, but that never seemed to be replicable, right? So we said, let's turn it around on its head and let's say, let's help people to get to be good workers. And if they're good workers, then they should be good performers. And if they're good performers, they should be satisfied. And that kind of leads us in that direction. So starting with the left in the yellow, we have expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. Expectancy basically says, if I put forth the effort, can I perform it? Do I believe, do I expect that if I put forth the effort, I can actually perform the thing that I need to do, which has a lot to do with, obviously, whether or not I believe that I can do something. It also has a lot to do with, do I have the skills to do it? And if I don't have the skills, how do I get to the place where I can get those skills? So expectancy says, if I put forth the effort, can I perform the task? That's the E to P. Instrumentality says, well, if I perform it, am I going to get a reward? And it doesn't matter what the reward is. Will I get a reward? And say, yes, there's a reward attached to this. Great. So the instrumentality basically says, if I perform, I can get a reward. And I know that. The last and probably one of the more important questions is, now that I know I can perform it and I know I'm going to get a reward for it, am I going to like the reward? The higher the valence, the more motivated I am, right? And that ties in with all of these. If I have low expectancy, even if I know I'm going to get a reward and I'm going to like the reward, if I don't believe I can do it, that has a negative impact on motivation. And we know, right, if any one of those are zeros, because it's a multiplicative function, our motivation will be zero. So 0 times 1 is still 0, and that means there's no motivation. Even if it's a 0.1, it still means there might be some motivation, but it'll be very low. Right? So what we need is to be high on all three of these areas. I have to believe I can do it. I have to believe I'll get a reward, and I have to like that reward in order to be motivated. And this is me looking at the situation, looking at myself and going, I think I can do this. I know that there's a reward because that's what the company policy says, and I think I like that reward. I think that'll work well for me, and I like that. So I will feel motivated to behave. That doesn't get us necessarily to good performance because what do we need in order to be a good performer? It's not just motivation, right? I could be as motivated as all get out, but if I don't have the fundamental ability to do the task, I will not be able to perform. So number one, there has to be motivation. Number two, I have to have the ability. And how does that get managed? Well, it can be managed through hiring people with the right skills, or training them to have the right skills. So as long as we have the right skills in place to be able to do the job, whether I'm hiring them or training them or both, it's going to be hard to get good performance. So let's say I'm motivated and I have the ability. I also need to have the support and the resources from the company. And this is outside of the control of the employee, right? The employee doesn't have any control over the role perceptions and how I perceive is my ability to actually have the resources to do the job. So role perceptions are about making sure that I have all the raw materials and the support and the information I need to be able to do that job. So you can say, well, I have the ability to do it, but if you don't tell me how to do it, if you don't give me the guidelines, if I don't get the support and the resources I need, I can't do the job. So our good performance requires motivation, ability, and support and resources from the company in terms of job descriptions and clarity about what's expected of me in order for me to be a good performer. If we're missing any one of those, people will perform, it just won't be really great. It'll be a low level of performance. We move then to the green, which is how do we get now a good performer to feel satisfied? And that good performer, in order for them to feel satisfied, need to have intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Intrinsic rewards are about the kind of work that we do, and am I excited about that? Am I conscientious about my work efforts? Do I feel like I'm getting a lot more responsibility and autonomy in my job? These are things that excite me because I want to grow and I want to be better as an employee. So I have to design jobs. That's that little box in blue. I have to design jobs in such a way that people will feel intrinsically motivated to do their job well. And then, of course, the extrinsic rewards are the company policies, right? They're influenced by company policies like pay, benefits, pay for performance, award systems, and things like that. So in order for performance to go to satisfaction, I need to have an extrinsic reward in place, and I need to make sure that the company policies are increasing that extrinsic reward to be as high as possible. So for good performance, I need both intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Intrinsic meaning my jobs are designed in a way that really excite me and give me meaning in what I do. And then the extrinsic rewards come from good company policies that I can assess and I can look at and go, oh, yes, these are the right policies in place, and these are the right reward systems that excite me. And then hopefully that leads to satisfaction. But it's only if it's done fairly. That's where that equity box comes into play. Like, I might get rewards, but if you're getting a higher reward than me, and we do the same basic performance, but I still see you getting a better benefit than I do, that decreases my satisfaction. I'm satisfied I can do the job, but I will not be as satisfied with the situation, and that will decrease my motivation in the long run if I feel like things are being done in an unfair manner. So motivation leads to performance. Performance leads to satisfaction. And there's a feedback loop, right? If I find that I'm motivated, but I don't get the support from the company in order to be a good performer, that tells me, right, that even if I put forth the effort, I may not be able to perform the task because I don't have the resources I need to do it. So that decreases my expectancy in the future. Like right now, I'm motivated, but when then I engage in the behavior and I don't feel like I have support, I will not be as motivated in the future to continue to do that. So you can see how we start with basic motivation, but that can be decreased when we start to interact with our company policies and with others in our company, and we don't get the support we need, or we don't get the training we need. And I might say, well, I've got resources, but they're not willing to pay me to train. I still don't know how to do this job. That will also decrease my performance. So I don't believe that I will be able to perform. If I want to go from performance to satisfaction, if my satisfaction is low, that means not only did I realize that I'm not going to get the reward I want. The job design and the company policies are not set up in a way that I'm going to get those intrinsic and extrinsic rewards resulting in my satisfaction. So now I go back and I look at instrumentality and valence and go, yeah, I might have had the ability and the support, but the reward systems are not that good, and I'm not going to be satisfied. So not only do I believe I'm not going to get the reward, I also, even if I got it, I'm not going to like it. So that, again, is the feedback loop back to what creates motivation. If I realize I'm not getting the support to be a good performer, that decreases my expectancy. If I'm not getting the rewards and I'm not going to be satisfied, if it's not being done fairly and I don't like those rewards, that impacts my instrumentality and valence moving forward. So now that you've treated me poorly and I've realized I don't have the resources that I want and I'm not getting a good reward, my motivation goes down then very significantly. So now I might have been motivated before. I'm not so motivated now because you've treated me poorly, and now I'm not going to move forward and behave at the level that you want me to. This is a complex theory. If you have any questions, come to me and ask me the questions on how this works, because it is detailed, but the color coding, I think, will hopefully help you to understand how these things work in a meaningful way.